This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm here with Jeff Krieger at Brokenwood in the Hunter Valley, Australia. How are you today, sir?
Terrific, thank you, Jamie.
So tell me a little bit about Brokenwood, a little bit about the history of what's going on here and what you're doing down in the Hunter.
Sure, well, we are a very fiercely privately owned wine company, established in 1970. So we're 40 years old, October last year. We're based here in the Hunter. It's our home. We make one of the 2 or 3 best Semillons in the world and probably the best Shiraz to come out of this region.
Now, I'd like to interrupt you there and ask you what you think the other Semillons are, the other fantastic Semillons.
I guess if you're looking at Semillon from the Hunter Valley, you need to listen to Jancis Robinson.
Never heard of her.
Yeah. The first female MW. She calls Hunter Valley Semillon Australia's unique gift to the world of wine. Apart from ourselves, thanks to our chief winemaker Ian Riggs, there is Tyrrell's, 150-year-old family-owned wine company, McWilliams, another more than 100-year-old family-owned wine company producing sensational Semillons. And then there's a bunch of new generation winemakers like Andrew Thomas, Andrew Margan, David Hook, Reese Ether from Myria Park, producing very good quality Semillons from specific plot sites here in the Hunter.
Please tell me what it is in your mind that makes the Hunter Valley so unique when one looks at Australia as a whole.
It is unique. It's a region that if you looked at all of Australian wine regions and you pulled all the grapes out and then you decided where you were going to plant, you wouldn't pick the Hunter Valley. It's subtropical, so therefore we get a lot of rain at vintage. It's a very humid region, and why would you plant here? Luckily, Sydney was the founding capital city, the founding port of Australia, and as the early settlers found out, grapes were part of the first fleet, and viticulture was a very important part of, surprisingly, English colonial culture. One of the reasons for that was to get the early settlers off hard spirits, so wine was promoted as the drink of moderation back 200 years ago.
Now, at that point, would you have been speaking about fortified wine?
Yes.
So that was seen as being like a step down from the hard spirits?
No, the hard spirits, as in rum.
Yeah.
It was a rum culture, it was a rum culture.
Right.
So even fortified wine was seen as better than the hard spirits, and wine, of course, was seen as being better even than fortified wine. So the Hunter Valley was first planted, we think, to large-scale viticulture around 1830, and developed from there, and this McColbin area around 1860 to 1866, and it has been here ever since. Part of the appeal, I suppose, of Hunter wine styles is that with the humidity they do ripen quite early, so we have low alcohols in our whites and low alcohols in our reds, and of course we do have 6 million people on our doorstep, which is one of the reasons, I suppose, you'd say that the Hunter Valley has survived as a premium wine region.
Why do you think Semillon does so well in the Hunter and less well in other regions of Australia and elsewhere in the world?
Well, Jamie, it's absolutely about climate. Here in the Hunter, we're subtropical, we're right on the coast, and during the second half of vintage, it means that we have 80, 90, 100% cloud cover. It's still very warm, so we get physiological ripeness to our fruit, but we don't get the sunburn and hence the grape shrivel that you see in other parts of Australia. So we get full ripeness to the fruit, but at much lower alcohols than you see elsewhere in Australia. And that's so important for Semillon. It's a slip skin variety, it's quite delicate, and it means that it needs to be brought in young. It's the heat that we get without the sunburn that means that we get these delicate styles of wine at very low alcohol.
How did you find yourself making wine in the Hunter Valley?
Interesting question. This year's my 40th vintage.
How many have you been?
40th.
40th?
My 40th vintage, yeah. My first vintage, I first learned how to pump wine from A to B, from tank to tank in 1972 at Wakefield Co-op. And it's something I fell in love with, and became a full-time winemaker at the end of 75 in South Australia. This region used to, when I studied in South Australia, used to cop a bit of a caning in terms of the rain, and to be fair, through the 1970s it was a very wet decade for the hunter. So when this job came up in the early 1980s, I thought, well, I'm going to do something, a challenge. It can't surely be as bad as everyone says, and arrived here at the end of 82 and see no reason to leave.
I think the great thing about Semillon is, as a young wine, it's vastly enjoyable, especially with seafood. It's high in acidity, it's low in alcohol, it's got these marvellous citrus fruit flavours, limes, lemons, and as a result of that, a great accompaniment to seafood because it cuts through the oiliness that you sometimes see in oysters and in deep ocean varieties of fish. But as the wine ages, it's always fermented in stainless steel, never in oak, here in the Hunter. As it ages, it develops these beautiful secondary characteristics, nuttiness, breadiness, toasty characters, which a lot of people think is about oak, but never is. And so it complexes over a period of time. And now that we age wines under screw cap, these wines can be enjoyed 5, 10, 15 or even 20 years after bottling.
Could you tell me a little bit about the different soil types that you have here and how grapes are planted according to those soil types?
Yeah, if you look at the history of the valley, we are now up to 180 years of grape growing. 190 years of grape growing. I suppose we're in a decade in. So we've got a lot of history and a lot of trial and error of what works and what doesn't work. So we come back to the core premise that we are subtropical, we do get a lot of rain at harvest. But because we're a hot region, we get ripeness a lot earlier. So one of the best places to grow Semillon, and now Chardonnay, is on the lighter soils. So you do get quite good foliage cover, you can get really good aromatics, very good fruit flavours on those lighter soils. And when I say lighter soils, they are somewhat pure sand. These are old riverbeds, old seabeds that are scattered throughout the valley. The reds, on the other hand, do extremely well on the heavier red soil, and most of that soil is volcanic in nature. The clays, they are red loams, and we do have some black loam soils scattered through the region. So it is whites on white soil, reds on red soil kind of scenario that has been developed, fine-tuned over the last 170, 180 years.
So tell me a little about the Shiraz that you grow in the Hunter.
Well, we were fortunate enough to stumble over a vineyard which we later called the Graveyard Vineyard in 1970. And that vineyard was originally established producing Shiraz. In fact, the cuttings are planted on their own rootstock and cuttings from Tyrrells and McWilliams. The Hunters never had phylloxera, unlike most of the famous wine regions right around the world. And so the Hunter is home to some of the oldest viticultural genetic material in the world. And what we know is Shiraz planted on its own rootstocks in the Graveyard produced some of the great wines of the world. In fact, here in Australia, there is an unofficial classification of great Australian Shiraz. It's produced by a company called Langton's Wines. And they have a number of classifications of wines which have 10 consecutive vintages and which have a much higher auction price than they do retail price. There are multiple classifications, but the very highest classification is called Exceptional. Penfolds Grange, Henschke Hill of Grace and Brokenwood's Graveyard Shiraz feature at that very high level. And it's due to the site, which is only about 200 metres from where we stand at the moment, Jamie, that produces this significant wine for Australia. The soil is so poor that 40-year-old vines are still only about, the trunks are still only about that thick. We call it bonsai viticulture, and it means that we get very low yield, about 1 tonne per acre of vines, but we get incredible intensity, savoury, medium-bodied, low-alcohol wines that age incredibly well.
Well, thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. I'm looking forward to tasting your wines.
We probably missed the 94 that we just opened.
Oh, bugger. Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today at Good Food Revolution. I really appreciate your time.
It's an absolute pleasure, Jamie, and cheers.
Cheers.